Hey everybody, thanks for watching Sweetcast. I want to talk about cancellation and when books should or should not be canceled, not just in the mainstream. In fact, I'm going to talk very little bit about that and more about independent comics and when you should make that next book and when you should throw in the towel. We're going to get into all of that, but before we do, if you haven't backed Downcast Rise and Fall yet, pause the video, go to the link in the description below, and get in now, because there's only, it's 30 hours left now, but by the time you see this, there's going to be less than 24 hours left. And so I strongly suggest getting in, checking it out. Even if you don't have the first volume, you can actually get the first volume right here or right here, depending on which cover for the second volume you want. All right, now we're going to get right into canceling comics. When should you cancel, or when should you be canceled?
Yannick, this is the first time a drag queen has ever been put on the cover.
A drag queen? A drag queen? I am the queen of drag.
Fortunately, canceling comic books is not like canceling people at all. Jimmy Fallon has got other things to be concerned about. In this case, I'm actually looking at this article from Bleeding Cool. This came out today on the 20th, and basically what's going on is that Supergirl number 42 is being canceled, and they actually went over several different titles here, 28 different titles to be exact, that have worse sales numbers than Supergirl, and yet they have not been canceled. Now, I realize that DC and Marvel have probably a lot of complex reasons why they choose to cancel a title and why they choose not to. I'm not going to simplify it and make it just about sales, because obviously if sales was their motivating factor, they'd probably do a lot of things very differently. But they have the rest of the machine that they're essentially feeding, and that is their parent companies. They've got a lot of money, they've got a lot of intellectual property, and so they will forego canceling books in order to just keep a title alive, like Captain Marvel, for example. Also, you might not know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe there's a problem with creators, creative team. There's any number of things that could be going on that aren't going to be public. All of that aside, I think it's important to look at the profit, and that's where I want to focus on. Not for the big two, because really does it matter? You're not watching my videos anyway and not listening to me. It doesn't matter. But if you're an independent creator, this question comes up as to when you should continue a series or when you should take it out behind the barn. Should you make that next book with the same artist, or should you find a new one? Or do you need to go back and to the drawing board and recreate something new altogether? These are all really tough questions, especially in independent comics, and it's something I've been thinking about quite a bit for the future, because I ideally want to have some kind of guideline and some kind of standards that I set for myself as a creator, so I know when a book should be canceled, what is considered successful, and what makes for a sustainable model for myself. Now, you might have some overlap, you might agree on some things, you might disagree, that's cool. I'm going to say the same thing, like if you're looking at DC and Marvel and trying to go off of their standards that they have for cancellation, I'd say that's a bad idea. It's not one for one at all. And the same would go for other independent creators. Your situations are going to be very different.
New Girl Order.
It's a top-selling author. Do we want that in here?
No, we want bottom-selling authors.
Now, if I look at Comicron numbers, it's kind of shocking, perhaps, at the sales numbers. If I'm specifically looking at trade paperbacks, which is more of the direction that I'm headed in, it is interesting that the sales numbers are actually incredibly low. I'm looking here, like this is the middle of the pack here. They're selling like 1,300 copies. And I realize trade paperbacks are one of those things that probably have a little bit more legs over time, and they're going to be able to limp on. But I could keep scrolling up here, scrolling up, and Downcast Volume 1 has outsold most of these books already. And given this is just a single month, again, they have a long shelf life, so to speak. They can continue selling, but it begs the question, you look down at the bottom of the pack, and when exactly should those sell? Well, I'm guessing here, because this is the second time these books are printing, generally speaking, with trade paperbacks, they've already gone to the bookstores as floppies. So the trade paperback is the second time around. It's essentially about maximizing your profit that you can get off of that story in a different format, and I guess it makes it more obtainable for some readers that are only going to be buying trade paperbacks anyway. It's when you get into the first issues, the single issues, or really the first printing of a comic, that you have to ask yourself, how long do you continue going with that series before it's canceled? Now, if I look at the single issues and I look toward the bottom, it seems generally speaking that 25,000 units is at the bottom end of at least what Comic-Con is checking. They actually went over the top 1,000. There are more out there that are not listed on here. Their entries list, they only are going over the top 1,000. And so there are undoubtedly more here on this list. Again, that's not what we're here for. It's not something we got time for. But at the bottom of this list, it is about 25,067 units sold, estimated units sold of a single issue. But I'm guessing that in indie comics, if you sold 25,000 copies of your comic, you'd probably be feeling pretty good about yourself, especially because it's unlikely that you're going to be selling it for $3.99 for that issue if you want to actually make some money instead of lose money on it. And so this immediately gets very complicated. There aren't really standards for indie comics. This is basically the point I'm getting to. So now it comes down to you, basically. It comes down to you and your readers. Are you going to keep making that book, or are you going to cancel that book?
I'm going to show up even if it's canceled.
I'm taking a look at Kickstarter here because they've got a bunch of comics on there. Some are selling well, and I would call them, pretty successful. And some are not selling so well, and yet they still have reached their goal. That happens absolutely all the time. Here's an example. Here's one that made $1,000. It still has 21 days left to go, so who knows where it'll end up. But that's an example of one that if you just stopped right there and got $1,000 for your book, the question would be, would you want to continue making that book? There are a few different goals in indie comics. If you're like me, one of my goals is to make a name for myself. This means I'm willing to take a little bit less profit in order to make a better product or to make more different books in order to make a name for myself. That's kind of important. At the same time, it takes an awful lot of work to make and promote, write, fulfill all of that. For all that work, it only makes sense that you get paid and to start develop some kind of semblance of a business model that you can sustain and keep moving on with in the future. And so the way that I'm looking at this is, with your particular book, your costs are going to be different than mine. It depends, again, on creative team to creative team. If you can have your costs at a certain amount, this is the way I look at it, and you've got your profit set aside of what you yourself want to take home, I think that's a good idea. Give yourself a cushion of what you need to make it worth your time. Obviously, if you're publishing something just for the experience, you might say that you're willing to take home $0 or even -$dollars in order to make that book happen so that you can make a name for yourself. Or even if it's just about doing that one book you always wanted to do and it's sort of a vanity project, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I and many other comic creators are starting to take crowdfunding and making comics a little bit more seriously. I want to level up, not just in the quality of books that I'm putting out, but also in how competitive I can be with the rest of the comic book market, not just the indie market, but all of the comic book market. So the way that I'm looking at this is that time is important. I'm really coming to realize that you're only as good as the last book that you've put out. And so, I don't want to be like who's a good example, like the Macklemore of comic book creators, where he did that one CD that sold really well. And it was like really, really overly political. And then everybody sort of forgot about him because he became irrelevant and he's not making music anymore, at least as far as I or anyone on the internet seems to know. I'm not saying that you have to pump out a monthly book. I'm just saying that there has to be some kind of schedule as to what is coming next. At least for me, that's definitely what I want it to be. That's how I want to run my own comic book creation. So that takes money, obviously, and I think it's helpful to have money ahead of time and probably before people are really worrying about it. You see the conundrum here, because if you're crowdfunding, people know about it already. They know it's coming. It's kind of difficult to, have some kind of a tight schedule if you're also trying to get it done ahead of time with money that you don't have yet, and the whole thing gets very complicated. But I think it's really important to protect or sort of mark out how much money you think you should be earning, what makes it worth it to you as a creator to pay yourself, figure out your budget for that project and what you need to cover costs, and invest into the next the next book, and you can come up with your actual goal. Now, my goal for Downcast, like for example, I went for $5,000 on this one. That was my goal for everyone and my goal for the campaign. As far as you can tell, the truth is it doesn't, it takes more than $5,000 to make a comic book. It's a lot more complicated than that. So I actually have a real goal, an actual goal that I think of that makes it worth it to me. Honestly, on this one, it's a lot more name building and learning the process, but I am going to formulate for the next campaign so that I know exactly what I need to earn to make it worth my time and to make it a sustainable business. So I realize this is probably really in the weeds, but I find it important and interesting because the way I see it, being in indie comics, you are part of the comic book industry. And so you want to be able to participate and you want to be able to compete at varying levels. And a lot of that is the price point, number of pages, the quality of the story, of course. It's a lot to weigh. Let me know what you think in the comments below about your own reasoning of when a comic book should be canceled, or is the answer never, because the point is not to make money, it's just to make that book that you really love. Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to check out Downcast in the link in the description below, and I will see you next time.